the School of Management, and if you stay around long enough, I'll be presenting later. But we've got an excellent row of speakers in this session, and to lead it off, we have Ciaran O'Keeffe, and Ciaran is from Bucks New University. So over to you, Ciaran.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So the title of my talk, Providing Transformative Exceptional Human Experiences in Undergraduate Psychology Teaching. At Bucks New University, the psychology department is very small. We have 6 full-time staff, which kind of gives you an idea of the size of the department. And also we're very new to VR, which is why we wanted to be represented here, to kind of reach out to colleagues with more experience in this area and to give you an indication of what we've been doing since we've acquired VR. I do have my contact details there, Dr. Ciarán O'Keeffe, so even though I was head of department when all of this started, I'm now associate head of school. My email there, ciaran.o'keeffe@bucks.ac.uk. It's an unusual spelling of Ciaran, and you can write the email address ciaran.o'keeffe with an apostrophe and it'll still get to me. You can write ciaran.O'Keeffe with one F and it'll still get to me. You can write ciaran.o'keeffe with apostrophe and one F. It'll still get to me. You can even send me an email with Ciaran with a K .o'keeffe@bucks.ac.uk and it'll still get to me. In fact, IT have considered every misspelling of my name, that if you send me an email and don't get a response within 48 hours, then you'll know that you've come up with some variation of my name that they haven't thought of. But anyway, this is a team effort, and it's a team effort for this and also very much related paper, a poster that's in the poster area, the breakout area, on ethics and VR ethics. This is a collaborative team, albeit it's very much led by Kristen Thompson, to be honest. She's first author on the VR ethics because it's her work as psychology technician that has kind of kick-started us talking about this in a different domain, but also doing research on it. So, let's give you a little bit of context. Like I said, it's very new, but we were quite fortunate to have an injection of funds over the last 18 months or so, just over 18 months, and get a new psychology lab with experimental cubicles and a lab that converts into a VR suite so that we have VR. In addition to that, we have other various bits of equipment that we've accumulated or purchased, BioPack, BioPack, eye tracking, various other things. Late 2015, early 2016, our department brought together, or staff in our department, our department brought together a few members of staff and utilised their research and expertise to create a new module, a new options module for psychology, critically exploring a range of exceptional human experiences that are not customarily taught or explored within psychology courses. But before defining those experiences, exceptional human experiences, EHEs, it may help understand what they are by knowing about our research and expertise, the 3 of us who put together this module, and how we eventually came to incorporate VR. The 3 of us represent a number of different subdisciplines of psychology: transpersonal psychology, positive psychology, Jungian psychology or analytical, and then parapsychology. Myself, whilst also having research, teaching and practitioner experience within a forensic psychology domain, my relevant area of expertise here, in talking about this particular module, is within parapsychology, which is broadly defined as the scientific study of the paranormal, very broadly defined. But my particular area of focus within parapsychology is within two main areas. One is Christian or religious parapsychology, that is any paranormal phenomena that occurs within a religious context, so things like stigmata, demonic possession, levitation. And then the second area, which is relevant here, is ghosts or haunting experiences ghosts and poltergeists. And a lot of people ask me how I got into this, and in a very serious academic conference, I could say, well, it's the early works of Jung and synchronicity that I read, and I was inspired by some of that work, or early copies of Encyclopaedia Britannica that my parents bought me, and I saw the word parapsychology in there, but actually, no, it wasn't. It was actually that got me involved in looking at parapsychology, the desire as a boy to be a ghost buster. So that's one area that's brought to this particular module is the interest in haunting experiences, which is a exceptional human experience. The other person involved in the module is Dr. Piersworth, who is primarily known for his work within positive psychology, but specifically being one of the developments of a recent movement in what's called second wave positive psychology. This is really more concerned with bringing out the best in individuals and society in spite of and because of the dark side of human existence. So for those that know or have heard of the name Martin Seligman, who is the originator of positive psychology has this kind of happiness association with it, and kind of the early research within positive psychology is very much not looking at the darker side. Second wave positive psychology is doing exactly that. It's about bringing out, and the quote from Piers and others is, the better angels of our nature, essentially, than more. And it's not so much about achieving optimal happiness, which is the overarching side of positive psychology. So that's his area, but also he would describe himself as a Jungian psychologist, somebody that's interested in things like individuation, symbols, collective unconsciousness, synchronicity, the persona, the shadow, the self, all terms that you associate with Carl Jung and Jungian psychology. The third person who is involved in the development of this particular module is Dr. Matthew Smith, in the top there. Whilst also a positive psychologist and the course leader for our Masters in Applied Positive Psychology, he's somebody with a background in parapsychology. Ultimately, the main area of parapsychology that he was involved in the past is the image on the right-hand side. The red image is telepathy research. But actually, now he's moved away from that, he would very much describe himself as a transpersonal psychologist, more than anything else, which is a kind of a subfield or school of psychology that integrates spiritual and transcendental aspects of the human experience within the framework of modern psychology. That's the definition. He would argue that transpersonal psychology is about looking at some of these aspects that are covered within parapsychology, but it's more about the experiential side. Parapsychology has two kind of approaches to it. You can have a perspective by saying, this stuff exists, I want to learn about it. So telepathy, ghosts, I want to learn about it. Or telepathy and ghosts and all of this paranormal phenomena exists because people say they're having the experience, but you might then go into it trying to work out what the rational explanation is for it. Whereas transpersonal psychology is very much saying, people are having these experiences. I'm not going to comment whether they're real or not. That's not for me to say. I'm interested in their experience and how it affects them and what they do with it in terms of their life. So those are the three people that sat together and said, look, we've got these three areas of interest and they do seem to overlap. And you can see from that then what potentially, when we talk about exceptional human experiences, what they are. Rhea White, who coined the term exceptional human experiences, she did it to bring together a large, huge set of experiences that had been considered in relative isolation to each other. And she initially came up with a list of about 100 exceptional human experiences, which she organised into 5 major classes. So 5 major sets, which include, they're listed here, psychical experiences, unusual death-related experiences, exceptional normal experiences. And it was only a bit later, in 2000, that she expanded the list to 200, EHEs, and then increased that set to 9, which are shown on the slides there. So 200 EHE examples, which then you can kind of categorize into 9 types. And I'm going to briefly go through the definitions of each of these is quite lengthy and quite detailed. I'm going to go through them very briefly, and as I'm doing it, I'm telling you what exceptional human experiences are. But think about where we are today and the theme of this conference. As I'm talking about these and describing these sets, think about the VR experience. So, mystical and unitive experiences are those in which there's a strong sense of greater connection, sometimes amounting to union with the divine or other people or other life forms or objects, surroundings, or the universe itself, often accompanied by a sense of ecstasy or of being outside of one's skin-encapsulated individual ego or self-identity. Lovely expression. Psychical experiences, on the other hand, are those in which we learn about or influence the world through means other than the conventionally recognised senses, motor systems, or their mechanical extensions or rational interference, in cases in which chance coincidence has been ruled out. So that is your archetypal paranormal type experience. So things like telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition. For those that don't know, precognition is about predicting the future. And the vast majority of evidence that we have for precognition in parapsychology is prophetic dreams, not pathetic dreams, prophetic dreams, when people dream of future events. Unfortunately, they too often tell us after the fact, so it's not so evidential, but that's an example of a psychical experience. Psychokinesis is another one, the manipulation of objects with your mind. Encounter experiences, which is another set, are those in which the experiencer is confronted with something that is actually there, but is awesome and wondrous, such as a glorious mountain peak, or something that is not supposed to be there, such as an apparition or a UFO or a random building. These could also include encounters with the divine, however, or angelic beings or mythical beings, or even some sort of inner guide. Unusual death-related experiences, particularly negative, but they can include near-death experiences or strange experiences associated with the moment of death. So clock stopping, for example, or pictures falling at the moment of death, those sorts of experiences. Peak experiences are related to, but different from, mystical experiences. They are self-actualizing moments in which one experiences more closely than usual all that one can be. Typically short-lived, yet profound, and are accompanied by a sense of enhanced perception, appreciation of the moment, and understanding. You may, as a result of this experience, feel lifted out of oneself or in the flow of things as you experience it. You might feel self-fulfilled. You might feel that you're engaged in some form of optimal functioning. Exceptional human performances are those that extend the limits of what a given person has been accustomed to doing. So those that go way beyond what has been previously experienced or understood in terms of your own capability. So are you doing something that goes beyond what you might normally do? It can include athletic experiences, so kind of extreme athletic performances or outstanding musical performances or unusual feats of strength or stamina, for example. Healing experiences would be spontaneous instances of recovery, cure, or enhancements of psychological, spiritual, or damaged well-being. The last two, desolation and nadir experiences, are those of profound feelings of isolation and experiences of loss of meaning, satisfaction, or well-being, which nonetheless may also be a trigger for peak experiences or maybe preludes or steps in one's overall development or movement towards their opposites. So they might move towards a peak experience that is actually more positive and joyful. And the last one, which is particularly pertinent, are dissociation experiences. Those in which one feels, knows, or acts in ways that seem apart from, detached from, or disconnected from other one's usual conscious awareness. And the sorts of examples would be these. And I just let them list there. Some of them will be terms that are familiar with you, familiar to you, near-death experiences, NDEs, OBEs, lucid dreaming, psychedelic experiences, any number of different experiences, and I think my favourite word is coming up, limerence, an exceptional human experience that means the act of falling and being in love. A lovely word, although my wife didn't think so when I wrote it on her card for Valentine's Day. So those are examples. So it's about relatively unfamiliar experiences, but somewhat transformative experiences. But as part of our development of the module, and as 3 senior lecturers who are promoters of interactive and kind of active learning, which we're very keen on, we initially prepared a novel module, so something that was very different in the 3rd year for these psychology students. So, for example, the first session, students walked in, rather than a typical seminar or lecture room setup, there was a circle of chairs. In the middle of the circle of chairs were 3 chairs in a triangular position where the 3 module developers sat and talked for half an hour about why have we done this particular module. So kind of throwing them off a little bit, wanting to create something new. But as part of that, what effectively we wanted to do is try and get students to understand EHEs. How on earth do you do that? How do you do that? How can you demonstrate an EHE? We could get people coming and talking about their EHEs, but is that really getting the students to understand fully the experience? Of course, the other thing is that we may actually have students who have had an EHE, but still others may not experience that. So there's all of these considerations, and there are some synchronistic moments, if you want to use that term, over 2016 or early 2016 that kind of helped us try and get to grips with how we might get students to understand EHEs. One is the overview effect, which is a cognitive shift in awareness experienced by astronauts. And so whilst this is a Carl Sagan quote, these are better quotes, and I draw your focus immediately down to the bottom quote. We're out there spinning in all this chaos. The Earth is a planet, the Earth is a spaceship, and we're all space travellers. And Mike Massimino goes on to say in his recent publication, and looking there was the instant realisation of this is paradise, this is heaven. It was kind of a moment of this cognitive shift, but also a transformative experience, and that's called the overview effect. Now, we had said about incorporating this into the module, but I was lucky enough to be sharing a radio studio with Mike Massimino and heard his personal experience face to face and thought, how can we incorporate this? We even toyed with the idea of visiting an observatory as part of the module. Any number of different ideas, getting Mike Massimino on Skype to talk about his experience, which would have been powerful, and we've got it recorded so that students can see that, but it's not necessarily enough. The development of the lab and the incorporation of all of the equipment then created opportunities for research. So I've done now some initial pilot work looking at virtual reality used to understand people's haunting experiences, which is written up in New Scientist. Also, at the same time, when we were looking for details about Mike Massimino, his MIT qualifications, in one of the sites that we found, there was a link to John Belcher and the Teal work that's done at MIT, technology-enhanced active learning. And whilst initially in the 90s that wasn't about VR, it was about using technology and encouraging this idea of active learning, that students take responsibility for their learning effectively, and you help guide that. And so therefore all of that context, which is a huge context, but all of that context should make you realise why, when we then purchased a VR, why that was a natural thing for us to incorporate in the module. But rather than demo it, it became a situation of saying to students, about halfway through, you know what EHEs are, we're now going to give you a choice to have a potential EHE, albeit a virtual one. What would you like to do? And ultimately, it became about the students' choices. So their choices, experiences and resulting discussions were unexpected and, I would argue, simply wonderful. So some students chose to be on top of Everest as their exceptional human experience, to have that. Others chose the spacewalk so that they could attempt to experience the overview effect. We had others going to use Google Earth so that they could potentially have the initial overview effect, but they could also have a floating experience that might be similar to an OBE, an outer-body experience. And whilst these were, amazing choices, and there were several others, they wouldn't be a surprise given the definitions of EHEs. What we actually found was this interesting aspect, that it was about the experiences. So for those familiar with HTC Vive, and you know about the initial tutorial involving a robot that's there in a bright white warehouse, we initially had that as the tutorial to kind of get students acclimatized who hadn't had any VR experience, and realised actually it wasn't, it distracted from the main EHE experience, but actually the room here, which I think is a part of Steam VR, or that room where you've got a menu and you choose, that actually became a better tutorial for students to get acclimatised to space and the environment. But actually we found that many students wanted to return to that room and didn't want to leave the room in itself. It was a dissociative experience in and of itself, just to be in a room that was not the reality of the lab. That anecdotal request, together with reported physiological experiences and students and staff feedback, highlight not the success of individual students' EHE choices as being effective demos of EHEs, but the whole actual VR experience itself being the best demo and personal experience of an EHE. So not the actual choice, not the actual experience, but just being in VR became an EHE reported by students alone. One of the proposed future directions we have is the capture of some of that positive physiological data, but also, given some of the fascinating talks that we've heard today, other ways of capturing quantitatively students' feedback of the experience. So there you go. And very much related to that is the ethics, which I know Professor Fraser brought up this morning, and our experience with putting this into the module and now doing research is this ethical component to using VR is huge, and I think a lot of the discussions going on here have been incredibly fruitful. So there you go. Thank you very much. Sorry I've run over a little bit, but thank you very much for your attention, and that's that. Thank you.
Thank you for that fascinating sort of presentation into this very different area. Welcome to ask any questions for Ciaran. We run over a little bit, so we'll try and keep the questions quite short if we can, please.
I've got a question about the pedagogy of transformative experiences. Do you know much about that? Because you see this light bulb moments, you see students have that time when everything clicks into place.
Yes.
And it's a step change, isn't it?
It is a huge step change.
Increase in learning from students, they jump.
There is a sudden
and
jump.
There's a sort of correlation to what you're talking about. I wonder whether you saw any potential for that application from a pedagogical point of view.
You mean in terms of that awareness, that light bulb moment?
Yeah.
Well, there's that light bulb moment within the module that I think we had from students. So we purposely placed those opportunities about halfway through the module so that at least within the first half they got a sense of what EHEs were, they heard some accounts, that sort of stuff. But sitting around the room, you got the real sense from at least 3/4 of the students that they were interested, didn't get it. Having that experience, and like I said again, it's not that they were on top of Everest necessarily or that they saw the planet, it was actually just that. And now I'm in a room and I'm actually, however long it takes me to get into it, I'm immersed. And there's a fabulous poster out there, Dr. Evans, based here, talks about immersion and what the nature of that immersion is. It's just that immersion, and then coming out of that and going, I can understand now those commonalities of EHEs. I can understand the dissociative aspect. I can understand the positive aspect. I can understand the transformative aspect of it now. And that in itself became absolutely a transformative moment, which was that light bulb moment, because then the engagement then for the rest of the module was completely different. Completely different.
So another question.
Yeah.
So would it lose its power over time? If that makes sense.
I would love to know. The other thing that we've so yeah, I would like to know if it would. The only anecdotal data I've got on that, it's not even data, that's the wrong word, but we had our students' graduation last week, and we had 2 of the students come up to us who had experienced that module, and they talk about the VR experience embedded within that module as the highlight for them, and they still are talking about that particular experience, but only 2 students, only anecdotal. But I'd love to get data, I'd love to do more studies on this, which is what we're trying to do. Like I said, we're only very young newbies in this particular area, but we'd like to get more data on whether it does last. The other issue we've got with this is, apart from 1 student, all of those students had not had experience in a VR environment before, and I think that's quite key. You know, that we prepared them for it, we had checklists, we talked them through essentially what was going to happen, talked to them a little bit about the feelings involved in it and the sense of space, all of those sorts of things, but they hadn't had the experience before. So even with that kind of preemptive aspect to it, you know, it wouldn't necessarily, I don't know if it wouldn't necessarily be as transformative for somebody that already had a VR experience, unless they chose something in the VR space that was something that they had never done before, that they'd always wanted to do. So yeah. Yes.
Have you observed any tensions between the students being sort of simultaneously corporeal and immaterial? So they're there in the room, but they're elsewhere. Any strange reactions that students have had to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the answer you want, but it is something we talked about in terms of students having the experience while their peers are in the room. So there was a couple of moments where a student was in the VR environment, was actually underwater, that particular student, and was completely immersed. And she talks about it afterwards, but she was completely immersed. And then at some point, I think it was a squid comes past, and her peers laugh. And she said afterwards that was the most negative moment of the VR experience. That was the most negative moment, because she had fully immersed. She was completely dissociated from her real self. She was just floating. She even said, I wasn't me floating around the sea. I was just there observing and being in the sea. I had no awareness at all of the lab. I lost that completely. Hearing the laughter brought me right back, and from that point on, I was conscious of myself, and I had lost that moment. And she said partly it was because I was aware, but then also my mind started going, why are they laughing? What's the laughter? What's all of that? So that's kind of maybe one of an answer in terms of that tension. So kind of future work, it would obviously be a lot more private. You know, we wouldn't have the audience involved, but then that becomes kind of pedagogically, what are we doing? Are we demonstrating the EHE, or are we actually giving them a private experience away from everybody else, which I think is our main motivation. So, thank you.
I think I've got a chance for one more short question.
If there is one.
Okay, I think we should thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.